Welcome back. This is part 2 of my interview with Devon Turnbull. Now, part 1 ran just a couple of days ago, and I will provide a link in the description below this video to part 1. And part 1 is basically a tour of his listening room that's open to the public. And it's a store. A store, an actual store here in New York City. Anyway, so that's part 1. But here in part 2, this is going to be a deeper dive into, what drives Devon. I think that's pretty darn interesting. But you know what? Devon and people like him give me hope for the future of high-end audio. Not corporate audio, not giant corporations making expensive stuff. No, I mean like a more rootsy approach to high-end audio. So yeah, there's Devon, but there's also Eric at Tecton, Vernon Roby, Christopher Hildebrand's company, Sean at Zoo. I mean, Sean has been doing this for 20 years. He was almost like the first wave of this new generation of audio entrepreneurs. And of course, John DeVore here in Brooklyn has been making amazing speakers for 20 years. And I've been to his factory many times, and it is definitely the real deal. This is a far from complete list, but I don't want to forget the guys over at Linear Tube Audio and their unique take on building tube electronics. And what unites all these people is their passion for making great audio. Not to get rich necessarily, just to make really good stuff. And basically, they all really feel a connection with their customers, a one-on-one human connection with their customers. And that is pretty darn amazing. So anyway, let's get back to Devon. This is part 2 of my interview with Devon Turnbull. So Devon, it's been a long time since we've done this. Mm-hmm. You have been around the world, it seems like a couple of times.
It's been a crazy year.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's great to see you, and thanks for coming to check out what we've got going on in Soho.
Yeah, this space is amazing. And now, people who see this video can come and hear some of this stuff.
They can. So
that's so cool.
Yeah, maybe we should talk a little bit about what is this place?
Yeah.
Why does it exist? And it's been a little bit of like a learning curve, work in progress for us. Having never operated, I've never worked in a hi-fi retail environment.
Yeah.
Not that that's what this is exactly.
Kinda.
But that's a component of it, for sure. But basically, a couple years ago, a pretty long time ago, before my first gallery show in New York, which I think was probably the beginning of a lot of people getting to know about my work outside of kind of the little pocket of the audio world that I exist in. The guys here at USM Modular Furniture, which is an iconic Swiss furniture company that primarily makes this shelving system that you see in here and all over this store. I've been a USM fan for 20 plus years. They just make this really beautiful, modern, iconic, it's very much speaks to my kind of aesthetic. It's kind of utilitarian, but really beautiful and refined. But
I like the stands. So those speaker stands are an example of that.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So that's a unique thing that we did, where we made certain custom length tubes that fit right under the Art Bookshelf speaker, which is a popular speaker we make, so that you've kind of got this really cool kind of marriage of USM hardware and OJAS hardware.
Yeah.
But anyway, so John, a couple years ago, came to me. We had just met for the first time. We had a mutual appreciation for each other's products, and the conversation just started with we've got a lot of shelves. Why don't we team up and put some kind of audio system in the showroom? We use the USM shelving and put your products on the shelves, and we can give people something to do in the space, play music. And as a huge fan of the brand, I thought it was just an amazing opportunity. So I came down to Soho, and they have so much space. It's a very rare situation here in New York City where people have access to so much great space in such a central location right here in Soho, in Manhattan. And so we just started walking around, like, what can we do here? And kind of toward the end of our like tour and our discussion, we came back to the back of the main showroom space, and they had a conference room set up in this space.
Room?
That's this space.
Right. Okay.
And it's a very special space that they were really underutilizing. It was just like a conference room. They'd work in here sometimes, but it has 3 huge windows with and a skylight. So they've got a great access to natural light. And the size of the room is pretty good for a listening room. And I just kind of threw it out there. I was like, could we turn this into like a dedicated listening room? And I hadn't had the opportunity to do that in a gallery yet. So this is just like to have a listening room that I could share the work and this experience with the broader public was like, just sounded like a dream come true.
Yeah.
You know, I sort of also realized that we had a really unique opportunity to not just like exhibit stuff that is like either unique or that we make as part of the OJAS brand, but also just to kind of give this type of audio that I like to think I participate in a home, while really New York hasn't had a home for this kind of audio in a long time.
The closest thing is or was
FiFi.
FiFi.
Yeah, absolutely.
I never made that connection.
Yeah, that was
you did.
right a few blocks from here.
Yeah, right.
Did you ever go to FiFi?
I did. Yeah, that's where I met Herb.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, FiFi is like a legendary moment.
It only
and
lasts like a
the
year and a
scene.
half, but that's where I met Herb and
JC
Morrison
Don Garber,
and Kimura.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a couple other epic personalities and talents.
Gordon Rankin was part of it, although he wasn't physically here.
That's right. So for me, I kind of have this romanticized idea of like what FiFi was, but I'm sure it was everything that I dream it was. But you know, I think that there's a lot that attracts me conceptually to what that place was. It was a place for experimentation, development. You know, they started as basically like a used shop, repairing things, and then sort of really kind of birthed the single-ended triode movement in America.
They refer to themselves as the Triode Mafia.
The Triode Mafia, exactly. It was the meeting place of the Triode Mafia.
Right.
And I think Kimura, you know, they kind of credit him for bringing that philosophy to introducing them to it, and then they all get into the directly heated triodes and the circuit topologies. And of course, you know, Kimura being Japanese, he was really bringing like the Japanese perspective to hi-fi, on hi-fi to New York, which is something that I have, you know, kind of in the absence of teachers like that, spent a lot of time going to Japan and making relationships and learning from the Japanese hi-fi world as much as possible. So being a little bit of a bridge for that world and our world is one major like objective of mine. And you know, we're now working with MJ, which MJ Audio Technology is an extremely influential kind of monthly audio journal that has now been in print for 100 years. 1924 was the year they started publishing MJ. Published it all through the war.
Wow.
Post-war was when it started to. It was originally like a wireless communication journal. So you know, like ham radio and radio was still like kind of a new and exciting thing that, you know, that I think just the Japanese culture, you know, people refer to as the otaku culture. Have you ever heard that term, otaku?
No.
Otaku is like an endearing term in Japanese that basically translates to like nerd. But it's like it's a kind of an amazing sort of endearing term for like nerd culture. You know what I mean? And I mean, I think there's a lot that has come from Japan: video game culture, anime, that all kind of falls under the umbrella of otaku. But Akihabara, which is, I guess you could probably argue as like the otaku mecca, the epicenter of otaku culture in Japan, is an area in Tokyo called Akihabara. And Akihabara used to be like the kind of Radio Row of Tokyo. Right. And so going back to like post-war Japan, this was like the predominant kind of otaku culture, was like, this is incredible new technology of like radio, wireless communication, and it was, from what I understand, extremely popular in Japan at the time. And just after the war, there were a couple of authors specifically who started publishing these unique hi-fi tube amp circuits in MJ. One of them was Isamu Asano, and there was one other guy that were publishing these articles. Asano, a lot of people know of. We made some Asano design amps in Japan for quite some time. We don't make them anymore over there, but Asano started publishing these single-ended triode amplifier circuits in MJ. And as stereo was introduced and the hi-fi industry started to boom, you probably know, in Japan, the hi-fi market was pretty much like on fire like nowhere else. But the interesting thing about Japan is that these simple tube amp circuits, known as single-ended triodes, were, I've been told, equally popular to like the most high-end hi-fi products that were mass-produced on the market in Japan at the time. So you start to see this unique kind of audio culture born around that time.
And what decade is this? The 60s?
This is yeah, I guess probably the 60s into the 70s, and then the group of authors of these articles grew, and you had a dozen or two very famous amp designers that were publishing circuits, like almost, some of them, I think there are a couple of authors that published pretty much every, I think the guy, Professor Kinoshita, who does a brand called DC in Japan. Well, I don't think you can even call it a brand because I don't think he's ever manufactured anything. Mm-hmm. He publishes a circuit every single month in MJ for like, I don't know how long, but at least 5 decades, I think. And so he's like a cult figure in the Japanese audio world.
Build those.
People build them. Yeah. And so you also have the birth of like the boutique parts industry, which something that Herb talks about, I think, kind of discovering at a time when that wasn't a popular concept in like American audio. Like the idea that like one resistor sounded dramatically different than another wasn't a popular concept at that time. In Japan, you had this boutique component market going back to the beginning. So, very esoteric transformers, for example, and literally every component. High-end resistors made in Japan, Blackgate capacitors that people will now pay 100 times more than the original retail price for. And I think importantly, the fetishization of a few really important vintage audio components that we would not have now existing in the world if it weren't for the Japanese audio scene. And two first things that come to mind are the Western Electric 300B. Absolutely wouldn't exist if it weren't for the Japanese. I mean, from the research I've done, I can pretty much say that as fact. There was a time when people would rescue like hundreds of Western Electric 300Bs from dumpsters. And there were a few now quite famous Japanese like vintage buyers who lived in the US and would just go around and raid tube inventories and amass a warehouse with thousands of 300Bs that are now worth thousands of dollars. And the other one is the Ortofon SPU. I think those two things are probably the two most iconic products or components, pieces of gear that define like the Japanese audio scene. And interestingly, neither of them are Japanese. But where the market for them was like exclusively in Japan. I mean, the Gerard 301 is probably another example of that. I just know that as someone who, I built my first Gerard 301 about 20 years ago. And it was very hard to find resources to do that in the US. Tone Imports was importing the Shindo 301, so certainly people were aware of it, but it was just so hard to find support and parts and everything else. And I went to Japan, I went to Akihabara, and there would just be like, you would just be walking down the street, find a random storefront with like 50 Gerard 301s in stock on the shelf ready to go. So I realized at that point that these important components that became a really iconic part of the Japanese audio scene, although they may have never even been sold in Japan, at that time, which I don't know when that peaked, I think it was probably in like the 90s, the majority of the world's those things were in the Japanese used market. That's changed now, but so MJ is an important part of the evolution of this scene in Japan. I think it's kind of where people exchange ideas, and a lot of people that were.
And you read it, by the way.
Well, I mean, I struggle to read it, and I use a lot of Google Translate, and I can read some of the. I can follow circuits and read some of the important. I can read katakana and hiragana, but I know very few kanji, so I can't like read an article at all. I struggle the same as everyone else to like really understand it. Japanese language is very, very. I think studying it is really fun, but I've totally given up on being like. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe one day.
I'm still struggling with English, so I understand.
Me too. So MJ is an important part of the evolution, I think, of this kind of culture. And so they also publish every month a profile of someone's home, the same way you have the listener systems. They have basically that called Listening Room. It's like a column that runs every month in the magazine. And I find that both inspirational and comforting, because it just kind of gives me like a lifeline to a whole like fairly large, historically very large culture of people with like the same interests and perspectives that I have when it comes to audio. So I have this Instagram account called Listening Room that a lot of people follow, where I pretty much just like digitize those articles and share them, and explicitly share like this is highlights from my collection, because I have a pretty large collection of old MJs. But
are they up there?
there's that whole row up there are all MJ. Yeah. There are two really important publications in Japan, MJ, and the other one is called Stereo Sound, and they have a periodical called Tube Kingdom, as well as these special edition books about iconic things like Western Electric, Altec, 300Bs, Triodes, JBL, Marantz, whatever. Like you pick an iconic brand, and they've done like a very, very in-depth profile of that company's iconic products. And so these things for me are just total like fetish level.
By the way, the people that are going to these shops and buying these things and stuff, are they of a particular generation?
Yes.
People?
Yeah. So I mean, the Japanese, as is true of a lot of places, but I think it's really extreme in Japan, that culture, there was like an abrupt kind of cliff sort of that that things fell off at a certain point. People talk about that with audio culture here as well, right? That there aren't enough young audiophiles. It's very true in Japan, even to the point where, like, when I have some friends my age in Japan that are like, we're, like twins separated at birth. But a lot of the time over the years when I go to Japan and I'm doing things with just friends, whether they're friends of mine and coworkers, people that I've worked with in other cultural things, audio related specifically, their reaction to my interest in audio and also Japanese, like tube audio, is just like, that's for old people.
Okay.
Which is disheartening. But I think there's starting to be some renewed interest, as we're seeing here. But it is from when I was younger and I would go to Akihabara and just walk around and discover all these shops, there's at least 90% less now than there was then.
Oh.
Yeah, it's very hard to find this stuff in Akihabara now. Akihabara now is almost entirely just video games and manga and like other otaku things.
So who's going to carry it on?
Man, I don't know. I think that's TBD. I've been now, it's really fulfilling that I'm working with both MJ and Stereo Sound on different projects. I'm working, seemed like a really reasonable project for me at the time, but a huge undertaking is helping them create an English language like compilation of some of the listening room articles, which is super enlightening to be able to read. I mean, there's just so much information in these books that they've published, both Stereo Sound and MJ, over the years, that just, I know that the rest of the world, people within the audio culture, just want to access this information. So I think just kind of helping to get them a little bit of a broader sort of recognition and awareness, and help them help them generate English language materials. But we've also been selling a lot of Japanese, because I think as a total non-Japanese speaker, there's enough in these books and magazines that it's a no-brainer acquisition for most people like me. So we've been importing from both publishers. So that is one thing that we.
So can people buy them here?
That's one thing that we sell a lot of here. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Probably the bestseller is the Speaker History books bestseller. We've sold the most of them because we've gotten the most of them in. MJ published this really amazing 4-book series of, so it's, I don't know, probably at least 1,000 pages of content of just like 100 years of speaker history. Wow. And although all the text is in Japanese, just like the photographs, diagrams, drawings, and specs are all there. And I mean, anyone that's just even a casual fan of speaker design, I don't know of a better compendium of like, this is what speakers have looked like over the last 100 years.
Herb needs to see this, I'll tell you that.
That's true. I don't know if he has. Has he?
Well,
I don't think so. Yeah, Herb.
He needs to see that.
I'm gonna gift him a set. So anyway, yeah. I mean, I think just kind of making some of that content available for people here is a really exciting thing for me, and developing kind of like a relationship with those publications and helping them just become better known outside of Japan.
So I'm anticipating. So for some of the people watching this video and they're interested in some of that, can they just buy it, over the internet from you?
We do have, yeah. We're low on stock right now, but we do sell them on the web on OJAS.nyc as well.
Oh, okay. Okay. So I'll provide a link.
Okay, we're going to need to get some more books. So yeah, and then, I think what I've been sort of saying since we started working on this space is like, this is never going to attempt to be like a typical hi-fi shop. We're never going to compete with the established hi-fi shops, high-end audio shops in New York, because that's just not, that's not exactly what I do. much more interested in sharing this kind of perspective on audio that I have, and like kind of the experience that I've had over the years of going to these shops in Akihabara and discovering sometimes components, individual components and pieces of gear that that you have to develop a little bit of a deeper understanding of the whole signal chain within an audio amplifier or other piece of equipment. You know, so we sell a lot of really special high-end tone arms. That's probably a good example of like average person off the street can't walk in and make use of that as they see it on the shelf. It requires more of a conversation about like, okay, well, what's special about this thing, and why would I want to build a whole turntable around this tone arm? So we have like.
But you would sell individual tone arms for somebody who already has a.
Everything on that shelf is for sale. So we sell the Groovemaster arms. I work with Ortofon. Have been working with Ortofon for a good while, because the Ortofon SPU is such an important part of like my inspiration and the systems that I build. There aren't a lot of retailers in America that really like push the SPU. People know of me as having a lot of experience with the SPU. You know, I think before you got that SPU in for review, we were having a conversation about SPUs. I mean, I guess I'll just like kind of mention maybe really quickly, like just from sitting here, obviously we showcase the stuff that we make, and people can come in and order OJAS gear through like Chance or myself here. Then we have mostly Ortofon and Denon cartridges that we stock, and so sometimes people walk in off the street if they've been looking for particularly like an SPU or a DL103, one of those line of cartridges. We'll just get kind of walk-ins off the street. And then we sell the Western Electric 300B. Jupiter Condenser Company, we sell these really special capacitors that they make. So mostly coupling capacitors for single and triode tube amps. Specialty tone arms. And then from time to time we have like special OJAS branded products that, you know, whether it's like a apparel or we have this collaboration incense that we made that we burn in the gallery, stuff like that.
Well, that's really cool.
Quirky things that you don't find in any other hi-fi
This is not
shops.
your ordinary hi-fi store.
This is not your ordinary hi-fi store.
I'm sure Dave Wasserman at Stereo Exchange is resting easy. All right. Thank you. This was amazing.
Thanks.
This was a magical mystery tour.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, this was good.